is really the genesis of this material today. So together with another guy that I've befriended over the years, another Army guy who owns a business in Ohio, we co-founded VetToCEO. Today we have over 100 volunteers, mostly veterans who also own businesses, and they act as guest speakers and mentors for the program that I'll describe in a minute. And then last year, for a variety of reasons, I started my third company, which is Fola Capital. I'm wearing the colors today because I actually had some business meetings. And during the day, I help small businesses raise capital, particularly for veterans, women, and minority-owned businesses for reasons that are outside the scope of this presentation today. So in terms of VetToCEO, this is kind of a summary of what we do. Our signature program is like an accelerator program. It's a 6-week online program. We've been online before it was cool to be online, before COVID, you know. It has a lot to do with what Logic Bay did as a business, but I'll leave it at that. So we've run over 40 6-week cohorts since 2013. We do about 2 or 3 a year. And we have, and it's for veterans only, it's free. And we have people from all over, literally the world oftentimes. So we've had people participate from Iraq and Afghanistan, which is always cool to see. But people from across the country participate in the program. And because of the time zone changes and stuff, a lot of them watch the recordings and all that, but it's highly interactive and we're very proud of it. But I'll just leave it at that. And you know, the important thing is we've had over 4,000 people go through this program. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you about is really based on my experience with VetToCEO. You know, I had all these preconceived notions of what stereotypes of what veterans were in business myself. And I've been an entrepreneur, being a veteran and an entrepreneur, but mostly all the things we've heard and experienced with VetToCEO are really kind of gelled up and summarized in what I'm about to tell you. So what I like to say is there are 5 things we never hear from participants who leave our program, okay? Now these 5 things, really, a lot of it has to do with any entrepreneur, whether you're a veteran or not, so hopefully you get something out of it. So number 5 is, I can't believe our plan works so perfectly, right? We never hear that, you know, we never hear that. Yeah, so in the military, no plan goes perfectly either. You know, plan goes to crap the minute you kick it off. And that's a well-known thing in the military, but that's pretty true in business too, right? And actually lack of, you know, lots of businesses create train wrecks, right? And why? Because any survey you look at that looks at small business failures, top of the list all the time is what? No market, right? Lack of a market is the #1 reason small businesses fail. And, you know, lots attached to that. But one of the things that is kind of unique to military, transitioning military, oh, I forgot one disclaimer. I know I'm in an accelerator building and Amy and Tony have been great to me. Sometimes I say things that kind of cut against the grain of lots of well-intended programs and people, and I don't mean to do that. I mean, these people are great and this building's great and they wouldn't, they're doing great things here. So I'm gonna generalize on some things. And I don't mean to, you know, swear in church here today, you know, with any of my comments. But one of them is we get cheered on as entrepreneurs, right? There's a lot of cheerleaders. We go to events and they got some genius on the stage. It's wildly successful. And we leave these events like, wow, that could be me. And we talk about all the wins, but how do we learn in life, right? The losses and the heartbreaks and the failures, that's how we learn. But how many events have you gone to where people talk about how much they've failed, right? So the reason I say that is in the military, a lot of it is when you leave the military, you get this passion speech. Like you used to jump out of airplanes without tanks. Guess what? There's no civilian equivalent for that, you know, bad news. So what really gets you up in the morning? You know, what do you like to do, right? Well, you know, if it's something you really like to do, great. But if it doesn't have a market, there's a word for that and it's a hobby, you know? An example I like to use with my military brothers and sisters is if you really like to crochet blankets, you know, good for you. But if you're going to crochet a blanket and like crochet the unit emblems on there and give them to people as they retire, They might not like that as a parting gift, I'm just saying. That's probably not a popular parting gift when you retire. So that's a hobby. You like to crochet blankets, but maybe there's no market for that. So that's number 5. The next one is we're going to have to give some of this money back since we raised so much. Okay. Do you hear that very often? You hear like, wow, we raised so much, we're going to have to give some back. Damn it. We didn't need that much money. How often do you hear that? Right? Never. So when you look at all these surveys, the number 2 reason businesses fail is what? We run out of cash, right? We always need more cash, even if we're business, even if we're successful. You guys probably know that, right? So if you open, say, if you manufacture something and you got enough cash to get going and do your first lot of production, and then somebody orders 10,000 units you didn't expect, that's good news, right? Well, guess what? You need a lot of cash to buy the material to build 10,000 units and you don't have it. Guess what happens? You go out of business. So you can go out of business for positive reasons as well, because you run out of cash, and lots of companies do. So that's the second one. And that's one thing we never hear as much as well. And this one's my favorite. The next one is, okay. And it is, our bankers and investors are true partners.
Except you.
What's that? We are good partners, but we actually, the community is your investors in our business, so they are good partners. I'm going to take you on a journey what happens in the real life here in a minute, and I don't mean to paint everyone with the same brush here. Bankers and investors are very good people. I'm not being derogatory towards the people that are in those businesses, but what drives them and what they get measured against and how they make money sometimes isn't in alignment with what the entrepreneur has in mind, right? And this is really what happens in the real life, okay? So the green here is our money. I'm going to show you this model here. So think about the green stuff as your money and the blue stuff as other people's money. When we start out on the entrepreneurial journey, particularly for startups, we spend our own money. What's the one word you hear all the time? Well, that's one of them. What's another one? Oh, God. What do they tell you to do when you want to start a business? What's a trick question? Bootstrap, right? You need to bootstrap it. You don't want to take people's money, bootstrap it. So that's what we hear all the time. And that's what we do in this phase. And you know what's probably appropriate to spend your own money at this phase. You're really tinkering with an idea. You spend low dollars. You might create a prototype or create a website out of Wix or something, spending pretty low dollars. For some companies, this is weeks. For some companies, it's months. For some companies, it's years, right? Depending on the product. But at some point, you say to yourself, or others tell you, hey, you got a real good idea here. You really got something here. Or you get enough feedback where you know what? I think I got an idea here. And people go, you go, girl, you go, you need to make it happen. So now you got more expenses, right? You have startup expenses. And what does everybody tell you to do? Use your own money, right? So we use our own money. And in the military, you don't join the military to accumulate wealth. That's not why you join the military. So for veterans, it's even harder to come up with startup expenses. So at some point, you run out of your own money, or your spouse or partner tells you you've run out of your own money for this great idea, right? So you reach that point, and then every business needs to get other people's money at some point, and even for good reasons. And that comes in 2 forms: loans or debt, which we're all pretty familiar with, and equity or investors, which not as many of us are familiar with, right? It's foreign to us. But even if you're among the small percentage of people that are able to get other people's money, what do they ask you for? Skin in the game, right? Okay, we're going to give you this $500,000 SBA loan, but you have to put 10 to 20% down. So you need $100,000 by next week, to get the loan. So it happens all the time. Or investors say, hey, the good news is you're part of the 2% we're going to fund this year, but we want you to invest alongside us. So when we give you our money, you don't take off, when times go bad. It happens all the time, right? But we don't plan for that, right? Because we never experienced it before. And then inevitably, you need even more money, even if you're successful. And this one's color-coded red. And I've created my own term for this called OSIS capital. So does anybody know what OSIS, the acronym OSIS stands for? What do you think happens when this happens? Halfway, keep going, Liz. Liz got half of it. Let's play Jeopardy here. Oh shit, I'm screwed.
Yeah, there you go.
And if you've run a business, you've had your OSIS moment, trust me. You have to make payroll next week and you don't have it. You haven't got to tell your people, you're going to not get your check next week. Or they're going to change the locks on your door because you haven't paid rent in 3 months and you need to get it by next week. These are the things people don't talk about, right? But it happens all the time. The good news is there's no shortage of people that will give you their money when you reach your OSIS moment. And that's when you hear the nightmares about investors taking over, banks calling notes, banks taking over, foreclosures, and that's when all hell breaks loose. And most of us, we're rookies at this. It's the first time we're experiencing it. So when you talk about investors, this is kind of what happens figuratively. And I was looking for the best visual to represent what the real life's like when it comes to dealing with your OSIS moment. And this is a fight from 1986. Kind of you remember the Tyson fights back then. And by the time I'm done with my comments, this fight's going to be over, okay? And you know, the moral of the story is when you reach your OSIS moment, you're going to realize how smart bankers are and how smart investors are. And guess who you are in this fight, right? You are not Mike Tyson. So they have black belts in finance and you have your little white belt when you show up. And again, they're not bad people, but what we don't talk about is preparing for that. And I've gone on a little bit longer than I should on this, 1 point out of 5, but this is the scary stuff that scares us as entrepreneurs, but also as veteran entrepreneurs, and you'll see why in a minute. There's a simple solution for it, folks. None of us know all that intricate, complicated finance stuff when we start businesses. Very few of us do, very few of us. So the trick is to invest in it and learning it. For veterans, trust me, when you join the Army and you're flying an Apache helicopter, trust me, you do not know how to fly that helicopter when you show up. But you have to study for years and practice for years and get trained for years before the Army finally says you're a helicopter pilot. The same is true in business. You're not going to master finance overnight. You have to practice it, just like you practice karate and things, right? So you have to learn about finance and commit to that, or have trusted advisors around you that know what they're doing, right? It's that simple. So the second one unique to, well, not really unique to veterans, the more I think about it, is this one, right? I'm going to start my own business instead of finding a job. It's less risky, right? We all think that, right? Let me go work for someone. Ooh, starting a business, that's scary, right? What if I can't make money and all this and all that, right? Well, what do we tell veterans? We tell veterans to get a job, right? There's all kinds of reasons for that, but every branch has a transition assistance program. It's called TAP. And they have these formal programs on resume writing, and all the DOD wants you to do is get a job. Why? Because the DOD actually pays unemployment benefits for people that don't get jobs. But specific to veterans, 65% of veterans are not on that job within 2 years. It's a pretty big percentage. And there's reasons for that I'll get into next. But that is a big problem, folks, and it's indicative of the challenges we're talking about today. And here's the reasons why veterans don't consider entrepreneurship right away. First and foremost is the idea of a paycheck. When you're in the military, Uncle Sam doesn't miss a payroll. Pay isn't even a discussion point in the military. No one talks about pay. It's public. You can Google military pay and everybody knows what everybody else makes. And it's a function of what rank you are and how long you've been in. That's it. You know, if you're getting shot at and you're overseas, you get a little extra pay. If you do dangerous stuff like jump out of airplanes, you get a little extra pay. But by and large, everybody makes the same, and it's all based on rank and time of service. So when you get out of the military, that goes from not even a thought to the top of your list, especially if you have a family. Like, whoa, you're getting out next month. Where's the paycheck coming from? So getting a job, taking the first job that comes along, oftentimes is what happens because you got to replace that paycheck. There's also some misunderstandings about safety that I'll get into, and security, and you know, flawed assumptions about risk associated with entrepreneurship, which is not specific to the military. There's this concept that you need lots of cash. You know, at VetToCEO, we say, use your own money last, and I'll say that a few times today. Like, you really don't need a lot of cash to be an entrepreneur if you do it right, right? There's a new language, much like you learn in the military, all these acronyms the military is famous for. If you put a civilian in one of these headquarters operations in the field, you wouldn't know what's going on. You would not know what's going on. But the military walks and they understand fully what's going on, and there's lots of reasons for that. And also, you know, we don't want to fail once we leave the military. We're proud of what we did in the military, and like the biggest concern we have is I'm going to be a loser on the outside. You know, I don't want to fail. So all of these things combined are reasons why, by and large, veterans don't think about entrepreneurship when they get out. And we're trying to change that, actually. But here's another part of this point. More than one parachute is always better. Take it from me. Having more than one parachute is always better. So is having more than one boss. I started my company in 2003 after 10 years of working for different companies. In 2008, we all know what happened then, right? The world came to almost to a screeching halt. I had my business, and I had about 30 customers at the time. I was here in Providence, actually. And, you know, sure, I had to let some people go. It was a bad time for my company. But guess what? I didn't miss a paycheck. I didn't get laid off. We lost a few customers. You know, I lost maybe 5 customers, but I had 25 still left paying the bills, right? And I had to cut expenses. It's not fun, but in terms of being an entrepreneur, it's much less risky with having 30 bosses as it is to have one boss. And I don't care what sex you are, as you get older, the fear of losing your job, you start worrying about it more and more, because you're not the young 30-year-old that doesn't even think about not being able to get a job anymore. Don't shoot the messenger, it happens. So, you know, when you think about entrepreneurship and risk, right, you got to kind of scratch your head on this particular one. And then the last one's my favorite one, okay? And it's this. I was a badass in the military. Being an entrepreneur is a no-brainer. Actually, guys, you never hear that. Now, there are all kinds of jobs in the military. You can join the military and work as a supply clerk. You can work in finance. You can go into cyber stuff, you know, computer stuff, lots of civilian equivalents. But the more you get to the tip of the spear, special operations, those Delta guys, Navy SEALs, and I talk to those guys all the time. They are petrified of the thought of being an entrepreneur. You ever wonder why? That surprise you? I can't tell you the words I've used when I've talked to some of these, because I'll maybe insult some of you people, but I want to shake them, and they're petrified. And the closer they are to the tip of the spear, the worse it is. And here's why. It's not true that because they were the badass in the military, they're not afraid of entrepreneurship. They haven't done anything alone in the military. From the day you show up, you've got a battle buddy. You've got people around you. There's no Rambos in the real military that do things on their own, right? And not only to your left and your right, and trusting people literally with your lives, you know, you got your friends in the Air Force above you. Even if you're on that raid, you have echelons of support all the way up to satellites helping you do brave things. So think about, you get used to that after a while. Okay, I'm going to do this badass brave thing, but I've got all kinds of stuff helping me accomplish that, right? You go from that culture and environment to startup entrepreneur. It's like the Wild West. You know, it doesn't feel too comfortable to people, and it's a really strange phenomena. The other thing is, our organization is already there when we show up. Even if you're an enlisted person and you become like an E3, which is the first level of some level of responsibility for others, your guys or gals are already there. Your little squad's already there. When I showed up at Fort Bragg as a platoon leader, and my battalion commander didn't say, hey, welcome to the unit. Go back out the front gate and recruit 19 other guys to be in your platoon, and then go out and raise money to buy your own tanks and stuff. It's not what happens. They just go down the street, meet your platoon, and when the next guy comes along a year later, it better be better than the way you found it. That's basically what they tell you to do at all levels. So the thought of starting up a business from scratch is not a coat that someone's used to wearing, right? There are other forms that I'll get into. But to tell a military veteran to do a startup, and especially if they were a badass, is so foreign to them, it scares the crap out of them, okay? So why should veterans consider it? Well, there's lots of reasons why. The number one reason is this: you've already proven you're crazy once, right? That day that you woke up and go, you know what? I'm going to join the Marines, you know, and you told all your friends and your parents, hey, I'm going to join the Marines. What is the first thing that comes out of their mouth? What are you, nuts? Why? That's what happens, unless you're in a family where that it's a tradition. But most of the time people hear, are you crazy? You know, and most people think you are crazy, but eventually they go, well, that's what he wants to do or she wants to do. Go on and do both things, right? So less than 1% of us serve today. And, you know, not too many, a very small percentage of people that decide to become entrepreneurs. So you've already have some confidence that you're already proven that you're nuts once, right? So, you know, this is really the core, and we were talking about this earlier, but, you know, so why is it that people who are veterans should be thinking about entrepreneurship? Well, the first one is leadership. There's no other entity on earth that focuses as much as the military on leadership, simply because they can't afford not to, you know. In the 82nd Airborne Division, if you're not a good leader, they eat their young there. You know very quickly that you suck and you're not going to be in charge anymore, because it's a unit that is within 18 hours notice of going anywhere in the world and being in combat. So I've seen it happen. If you're not a good leader, you're not going to be the leader. And it's pretty cruel sometimes, but it's not that they didn't give you a chance. But no one analyzes leadership like the military in all branches, right? And they have a whole system to promote good leaders and get rid of people that aren't. You know, elite sports teams might be a close second. So you have team captains and coaches that, you know, that's a good other domain for leadership. But in the military, leadership's not some college class you took. You know, you actually have to practice leadership constantly and be a good leader. The second is you're dealing with multiple stakeholders. When you go out on a mission, for example, you have to deal with all kinds of people you'd never met before. So you might go on a mission and you have this, like in the Army, you might get I had an Air Force F-16 pilot assigned to me when I went to the Gulf War, who was responsible for the air cover, right? I never worked with this dude before, right? And then we had, you know, other people that were in charge of artillery and air defense and all these people, and you kind of are used to just coming together and getting the job done. But and then you deal with local people, you deal with local police, you deal with local civilians, you have all these stakeholders. And by the way, you're in your 20s, and you learn how to deal with all these multiple stakeholders to get the job done, right? You also have to negotiate constantly with these stakeholders. I'm proud to say that I traded a box of, you know, MREs of the military meals. So when we deployed to the Gulf, we had the brand new ones because we were the 82nd, and we get to bring ours with us. Well, the Marines had these old, crappy first generation MREs that they had to get off the ships that have been sitting somewhere for 20 years. So I traded a box of MREs, 12 of them, for an engine for a Humvee from a Marine unit. But that was my like best negotiation ever, and I'm proud of it. But anyway, you learn how to negotiate. You clearly know how to manage risk and make decisions. The military has a formal way of teaching everyone how to make decisions. It's the same model for all the branches, and there's actually a manual on decision making, classes you have to take. It's the same decision-making model from the lowest to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they do that because when you do military stuff, everybody has to be on the same page in terms of a planning model. So it becomes wired in your brain. And when you leave the military, when crises happen in your real life, it's kind of humorous in some ways. You kick into that mode. And I won't bore you with the description of it. When I'm with veterans, they all know what I'm talking about, right? So they start getting into this military decision-making mode. And, you know, it's unique to the military. And you're also reacting to the world around you, right? Does this sound familiar? Isn't this entrepreneurship? Don't you have to be good at this stuff to be a good entrepreneur? I mean, it's you don't have to go to the military. Then gives you the most expensive experience and training in the world to get good at this stuff. And if you end up being successful in the military, you've proven you're good at this stuff, particularly the top one, you should have all the confidence in the world to be an entrepreneur, because this is the hardest stuff about being an entrepreneur. You can be good at all that other stuff that involves on reading spreadsheets and doing business plans. But if you're not good at this, you know, like when stuff happens in business and you don't have these skills, you know, and you're a straight A at you know, some Ivy League school, and you started a business, but you stink at this, you're not going to be successful. So what I tell veterans is, and the reason this slide's there is, have confidence that you have this DNA in you from your military service that pays dividends when you're a small business owner. So if you take that and look at a couple other things, if you're a veteran in particular, or not. The first one is actually 3 paths to entrepreneurship, or we like to say small business ownership instead of entrepreneurship at VetToCEO. When you say the word entrepreneurship, everybody thinks startup, Shark Tank, right? But startup gets all the sexy glory, and that's not the only way to become a small business owner, is it, right? Franchising is another one. I'm a big fan of franchising. Why is franchising a good choice? Well, think about the top 2 reasons why companies fail that we covered. Lack of a market, and you run out of cash. Trust me, if you open a Chick-fil-A or a Jersey Mike's somewhere with their help, what are your chances of not having a market? The brand, they've already done the hard part, which is building a brand. Everybody that went before you in those franchises have proven there's a market for that, right? So you can take that top reason right off the table. Don't even have to worry about it, right? If you open up a Jersey Mike's, say, right? The second reason is companies go out of cash. Franchising gets a bad rap because people say, oh, it's expensive to open up a Jersey Mike's. I have to have $500,000. And like, yeah, you have to have $500,000 because franchises know how much you need to be successful. So you avoid that OSIS moment we talked about. And people get sticker shock when they look at franchises. Folks, trust me, they just know really finely and acutely how much money you really need. So why not franchising? Veterans do great in franchises because they're great at following procedures, right? Franchises love them. And my favorite one of all time is buying an existing business. Nobody talks about that at these events, nobody. Yet there's millions of businesses that are ready to transition, what the owners want to exit. And veterans make great candidates for that because they will put their head through a wall before they fail with an existing business. Back to, there's always somebody there that I talked about. Veterans are really good at walking into an existing company. That's what they're used to. They're used to walking into a room full of strangers and now they're in charge all of a sudden. That's what happens in the military, right? It feels very comfortable to them. So there's 3 paths to small business ownership. We already talked about this. 10 customers are less risky than 1 boss, right? And then another one we talk about a lot at VetToCEO is to use your own money last. And people yell at us for telling people this, particularly from the finance communities. Yeah, you can use your own money last. There's lots of ways to use your own money last. The co-founder of VetToCEO, buddy of mine named Mike Horn, I've hired him 3 times and fired him once. And when I fired him, which was in 2008, when I had to cut costs, he was bummed out and he acquired a manufacturing firm in Ohio that his brother was working at. His brother said, they're shutting this place down. He said, why? He goes, owners got divorced and the wife got the business and she just wants to shut it down. He flew out to Ohio, did a deal called seller financing, said, look, if you don't shut it down, I'll give you X amount of money over time. I'll run the place and pay you over time. And he actually went to the local credit union who was flipping out. It's in a small town in Ohio. They were flipping out that the local plant's going to shut down. They got a $100,000 loan from them with 0 money down, gave her $100,000 up front and paid her over time. He's doing more than 10 million a year now. And he didn't use a dime of his own money. Now, if you met Mike, he's not the brightest bulb on the tree. And trust me, he was an Army Ranger. If he can do it, anybody can do it. So seller financing and buying an existing business is my favorite. I wish I did it, having done 3 startups, but nobody talks about it. And the reason why I like it, of the 3 methods of being a small business owner, it's the one where you need the least amount of money. So if money's an issue, that's the way to go. So what do we hear from veterans who go down the entrepreneurship path? Well, we hear things like this. I should have done it sooner, right? Today, when I got out, I'll never forget, I was in Fort Knox, Kentucky when I left the Army. And the day I left the Army, we had green ID cards at the time. And that meant you were on active duty. And I gave this specialist Army person my ID card. She took it, she turned around, took another picture of me and handed me a red one, which means now you're in the reserves, right? Which was like a really gut-wrenching moment in my life that I'll never forget. And then she said, there's the door. Thank you for your service. That was it. So today you've got all kinds of programs like VetToCEO, Boots to Business, Bunker Labs. You might have heard of some of these. So it's better. But what still needs to happen is people even on active duty need to consider entrepreneurship even before they leave the military. And we're seeing more and more of that now. Because of this point, most people that realize that the skills we're talking about today that made them successful as entrepreneurs wish that they had done it sooner because of that. The second thing you hear a lot is, I'm never going back. And this is probably true for any entrepreneur, right? Once you kind of figure it out and you kind of hit smooth air and things are running okay, you hear that from everybody, right? I'm never going back to working for someone else. And the last thing you hear is what we're talking about today. Even though I was in the tip of the spear doing crazy things, you look back and say, wow, I did learn a lot in the military and I never realized it till I had to practice some of those skills in the context of being a small business owner. So that's kind of concludes my little talk today. Does anybody have any wild reactions to this or any observations they'd like to share or any complaints they'd like to file right now about what I've said?